The midday suns cast twin shadows across the sparring field of the Galactic Unity Corps training grounds, bleaching the dust to a pale gold. Rows of cadets stood at parade rest, motionless except for the occasional flick of a tail or nervous shuffle of boots. At the center of the formation loomed Commander-Instructor Kravax, 7 feet of armored scales and cold disdain, pacing like a predator surveying his meat. He stopped in front of the smallest cadet in the line, barely over 5 feet tall, unassuming, human. Riley's jaw didn't flinch when he lowered his heavy-jawed snout close to her face. "You are the runt of this unit," he hissed. His voice was gravel over stone, laced with something worse than contempt, certainty. "Earthlings breed weak and loud. I'll break you by end of cycle." Riley raised an eyebrow. "I was told you were good with your hands. Didn't realize that meant slapping around the trainees." A few cadets stifled nervous sounds, some approximating laughter, others a chitter of unease. Kravax's reptilian eyes narrowed. "You will not speak out of turn, human." She shrugged. "You asked for a reaction. I gave you one. That's fair." The instructor's nostrils flared, exhaling a plume of heat Riley swore was deliberate. He turned away, snarling orders. "Pair off. Drill Form 17. No excuses. No mitigation fields. Bruises build memory." Riley found herself paired with a Varlaxian whose 6 limbs moved with insectoid precision. They danced through the forms, exchanging blows measured more for rhythm than impact. But Kravax's gaze kept drifting back to her. Watching. Calculating. By the 5th round, the drills had shifted into full-contact simulation. Bruises bloomed across bodies. A colliery cadet hissed as a joint popped. A Voldrin spat a tusk into the dirt, grinning. Riley's lip bled from a glancing elbow, but her focus never wavered. "Stop," Kravax barked. The field froze. "Human. To center." Riley stepped forward, eyes steady. The air tightened. Kravax circled her slowly, theatrical in menace. "Your stance is flawed. Feet too narrow. Spine too relaxed. Weak foundation." "My last instructor said I moved like a predator," she replied calmly. He was either blind or human. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Without warning, Kravax's clawed hand snapped out, backhanding her across the face. The crack of impact echoed like a gunshot. Gasps erupted from the cadets. A Minari stepped forward instinctively, only to be yanked back by a squad mate. Riley staggered. Blood traced her cheek. She didn't fall. Kravax's voice boomed. "This is discipline. You will learn your place." She turned back toward him. Slowly. Deliberately. "That," she said, wiping blood from her lip, "was a mistake." Kravax sneered. "You'll file a grievance, I assume? Cry to the command instructor?" She stepped closer, just one stride. "No. I'll file this under unprovoked assault and handle it like we do on Earth." There was a beat, a silence that felt carved from stone. "You dare," Kravax began. She moved. A blur of motion, compact and violent. Her elbow slammed into his solar plexus before his brain processed the attack. He stumbled. She ducked beneath a clawed swipe and struck again, knee to the joint of his towering leg. He buckled. Gasps turned to roars. Cadets scrambled backward. Kravax howled and lunged, but she was already behind him, slamming her palm into a nerve cluster at the base of his neck. He collapsed forward, claws raking the dirt. Riley stepped back, breathing hard but steady, eyes still locked on him. He didn't rise. Footsteps thundered. Uniformed staff poured onto the field, weapons drawn and held at ready. A commanding voice, clear, mechanical, amplified, rang through the chaos. "Enough!" The crowd parted. Command Instructor Tovin emerged, his armored exosuit glinting under the suns. His compound eyes flicked from Kravax's crumpled form to Riley's blood-smeared face. "Explain." Riley saluted crisply. "Sir." CI Kravax initiated physical contact without provocation. I responded within proportional parameters to neutralize the threat. Tovin paused. Silence reigned. Then, in a low, almost curious tone, "You neutralized a decorated war instructor in under 6 seconds. "I trained on Earth," she replied. "We don't do dominance displays. We do results." Behind her, the cadets were watching her differently now. Warily, respectfully. Kravax groaned, barely conscious. Tovin turned to the med team. "Get him to recovery." Then to Riley. "Remain on standby. We'll speak soon." He walked away, murmuring something into a calm. Riley stood alone at the center of the field, her breath beginning to steady, her lips still bleeding. The Minari cadet from earlier approached hesitantly. That was not regulation. Riley smirked, brushing dust from her uniform. Neither was slapping a human. Then she turned, eyes scanning the crowd. Every pair, alien and otherwise, watched her like they'd just met a different species altogether. One thought pulsed behind those stares, unspoken but unanimous. Do not touch the human. And for the first time since arriving in this galaxy, Riley Shaw knew she wouldn't have to repeat herself. Not twice. The infirmary lights were too bright, sterile and humming with quiet menace. Kravax lay in a diagnostic field, his scales bruised in places no one had ever dared bruise before. He was awake now, barely, and silent. His pride had taken more damage than his body. In the adjacent debrief chamber, Riley Shaw stood alone before the tribunal. 3 senior officers of different species observed her with unreadable expressions. Their uniforms bore 1,000 years of tradition, and not one had anticipated needing it to judge a human cadet for flattening a battle-hardened instructor. "The footage is clear," the Zarnan judge clicked, mandibles fluttering. "But we require context." Riley didn't blink. "He struck me." I responded. "That's context." The Larithian representative raised a translucent brow. "And you believe your response was appropriate?" "I could have broken his arm. I didn't. I could have crushed his windpipe. I didn't. What I did was enough to stop him and remind everyone that humans are not here to be abused." The judges shared a glance, part curiosity, part caution. The room fell quiet as they reviewed the incident from every angle, every thermal and kinetic signature recorded by the field surveillance array. After several minutes, the silence broke. "You may return to your quarters pending review. A final decision will be issued within 1 cycle." Riley nodded once, turned on her heel, and left without another word. She didn't need to win over the tribunal. The fight had already won her something more valuable, reputation. Word traveled fast through the barracks. A Kravax, the feared, the untouchable, had been humiliated. And not just by any human, but by one who never raised her voice, never bragged, and never hesitated. She passed through the main hall, cadets parting like tidewater. A Hekari with sensor stalks lowered her gaze in acknowledgement. A Telvan warrior offered a tight salute. A week ago, they wouldn't have bothered learning her name. Inside her quarters, Riley sat on the edge of the bunk, flexing her sore knuckles. She didn't regret it, not the fight, not the tribunal, not the bruise still swelling her jaw.
There was a soft chime.
Her door slid open to reveal C.I. Tovin, his exosuit polished and expression unreadable.
"Cadet Shaw."
She stood immediately. "Sir."
"Sit."
"This isn't disciplinary." She complied, but kept her spine straight. Tovin leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. "I've served 3 tours on the edge of known space. I've seen creatures that eat plasma and spit antimatter. None of them made Kravax bleed." Riley said nothing. "I've reviewed your records. Civilian combat tournaments. Unarmed defense certifications. Volunteer response teams. You didn't just learn how to fight, you live it. Where I grew up, violence wasn't a sport. It was preparation." Tovin tilted his head. "Do you know why most species fear humans?" I assumed it was the teeth. A thin smirk ghosted across his features. "It's because you don't stop. When your bodies give out, your minds keep going. And when your minds break, something primal takes over. Most species call it madness. Humans call it pushing through." He stepped closer, voice lowering. "You didn't just humiliate Kravax. You reminded every cadet in this program why Earth was even invited to the core." Riley's voice was calm. He made a choice. I made one back. I won't apologize for that. You won't have to. She blinked. You're being reassigned. Effective immediately. Expelled. Promoted. She stared. You'll lead a new mixed-species combat unit. Ground ops. Close quarters emphasis. They need someone who understands what a real fight looks like, not just choreography. A beat passed before she answered. And what about Kravax? Currently pretending not to remember what happened. He'll be transferred, probably somewhere with less public embarrassment. Riley nodded once. When do I start? Tovin turned to leave. You just did. The next day, Riley stepped into the training hall wearing a new badge on her uniform. Her unit was already assembled, 6 cadets, 3 species, none looking entirely comfortable. She studied them in silence for a moment, then began. Forget what you think you know about combat. If you hesitate, you'll get hurt. If you posture, you'll get embarrassed. If you assume your opponent fights like you do, you'll be wrong. They watched her with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. She raised her voice, not to shout, but to cut clean through the tension. You've all seen the footage.
Good.
Now forget it. I'm not here to impress you. I'm here to make sure you survive. A Telvan cadet spoke up. Is it true? You took down Kravax in one engagement. She walked up to him, deadpan.
No.
I took him down in 3 movements. He swallowed hard. Riley turned to the rest. Form a line. We start with reaction drills. And no one's leaving this room until you land a hit on me. They blinked. She cracked her knuckles. Good luck. Hours later, bruised and breathless, her unit was still on their feet, barely. None had landed a clean strike. Yet all of them wore something new on their faces. Belief. Not in her strength. Not even in her skill. In her. And as they reset for another round, sweat dripping and muscles shaking, one cadet murmured just loud enough to be heard. If that's what humans are like when they're calm, I don't ever want to see one pissed. Riley just smiled. She could already feel it. Command didn't know it yet, but she had just begun to change everything. Smoke bled across the ruined corridor, like a wound refusing to clot. Emergency lights pulsed red in jagged rhythm, illuminating twisted beams, flickering hollow signs, and the scorched remnants of what had once been a communications relay. The outpost, once a strategic relay hub, was now a war zone, and somewhere in its bones, hostiles were still moving. Riley crouched behind a chunk of shattered bulkhead, eyes narrowed beneath her visor. Her squad flanked her, weapons drawn and breath tight. They're still pinging our motion sensors. At least 2, maybe 3 left, murmured Soar, the Telvan cadet, his tone edged with tension. Correction, said Kelt, the Larithian scout beside him. 2 confirmed. 1 is dragging a limb. They're trying to loop behind us. Let them, Riley said flatly. She didn't raise her voice. She never needed to anymore. Her authority was measured in bruises, precision, and the absence of failure. They moved. Ghost quiet. Efficient. A turn, a sweep, a breach. The corridor narrowed into a pressure-lock junction, too tight for a full squad maneuver. Shaw, we don't know the full layout beyond this, Soar began. Don't need to, she said, sliding her blade free with a quiet metallic rasp. They're cornered. She darted forward without waiting for permission. She didn't ask for trust anymore. She had it. The enemy came fast. Karnathi insurgents, armor blackened by soot and rage. One surged toward her with a jagged arc blade, screaming in a language Riley didn't care to understand. She stepped inside the arc of the swing, seized the attacker's wrist, and drove her knee into his chest. His body folded. Her elbow dropped him flat. A second lunged, wild with panic, and caught the hilt of her blade between his ribs. His weapon clattered to the ground. Behind her, the squad spilled in. Soar laid down suppressive fire. Kelt darted past to secure the rear flank. The last Karnathi tried to flee. Riley overtook him in 4 strides and brought him down with a sweep to the legs. He hit the ground, and she was on him in a flash, blade poised but unmoving.
Talk, she ordered.
He snarled something defiant and spat. She drove her knee into his neck, not enough to crush, but enough to remind him who was still breathing oxygen by her choice. I said talk. He choked out a growl. You're just another animal. All of you. Riley tilted her head.
Funny.
You're the one bleeding on the floor. Kelt approached, scanning the downed insurgent with his ocular band.
He's low rank.
Not command. Useless. Then we leave him, she said, rising. Mark the coordinates for pickup. No sense wasting meds on trash. The mission ended 10 minutes later with a secure perimeter and a silent exfil. Back aboard the cruiser, the debrief was short. They'd neutralized the outpost, recovered classified data cores, and taken 0 losses. Commander Tovin stood in the observation deck afterward, flanked by 3 fleet captains, watching footage of Riley's takedowns on a looping replay. She's not standard issue, said one captain, her feathers ruffling with unease. No, Tovin replied. She's what we get when we stop trying to tame humans and let them lead. Another captain leaned forward. What about discipline? She makes her own calls. And wins, Tovin answered simply. Below, Riley paced the training ring, still suited up. Her squad watched her with exhaustion and awe, dripping with sweat and bruises, but never doubt. She paused. You're learning.
Fast.
But don't mistake victory for security. You hesitate next time, you're dead. Soar stepped forward. We didn't hesitate. We followed you. Riley studied him for a moment. Then you lived because you didn't second-guess it. That's what makes the difference in a real fight. Instinct, not protocol. There was silence. Not defensive. Not resistant. Just listening. Kelt finally spoke. Is that why Kravak's lost? She turned slowly. Kravak's lost because he thought strength was enough. It isn't. You need judgment. Control. A reason to fight that goes beyond pride. Soar nodded. What's yours? Her gaze drifted past them, beyond the ring, to the void outside the cruiser's transparent bulkhead. Because if I don't fight, people die. And I'd rather bleed than bury someone who trusted me. The room quieted. There were no further questions. Later, alone in her quarters, she opened the holomessage waiting in her private queue. A new deployment. Outer Rim. Not training anymore. Real war. She accepted without hesitation. No one slapped humans anymore. Not without expecting to bleed. And somewhere out there, Riley Shaw had just been marked for something bigger than any cadet program or tribunal. Because when the galaxy finally realized what kind of leaders humans made under fire, they wouldn't laugh. They'd fall in line. Or fall flat.